He raised his glass, smiled, and said, "I'm proud of all my children, except the loser at the table. That loser was me. I just bought him a brand new Mercedes for Father's Day. For 32 years I thought I wasn't good enough. No matter how hard I tried, he never looked at me like he did my siblings." Then came the DNA test, the truth he'd hidden all my life. He wasn't even my real father. So while he bragged about the car like it was his, I stood up, walked to the center of the table, and placed the sealed envelope by his wine glass. No meltdown. Just a reckoning. One moment of truth that shattered his legacy forever. Despite establishing a prosperous profession in finance, my father has never found me good enough. My name is Clara Whitmore, and I am 32 years old. This year, more than usual, I dreaded the upcoming annual family reunion supper. In the hopes that things might change, I had offered him a luxury car as a peace offering. I had no idea that a document in my purse would completely alter my life. I would at last comprehend why my father never loved me by the end of the night. Tell me where you're viewing from before I tell you my tale. And if you've ever stood up to someone who didn't understand your value, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. Believe me, my experience may inspire the courage you require as well. Our family looked picture perfect to others since we grew up in a wealthy Boston suburb. However, things were completely different behind closed doors. From modest beginnings, my father, Charles Whitmore Sr., grew his real estate development business into a multimillion-dollar enterprise. Above all else, including family ties, he placed a high importance on respect, success, and status. From my earliest recollections, Dad was never the type of parent who helped with homework or went to school performances. Rather, he was the scathing critic who reminded me that second place was only the first loser, questioned why I wasn't selected as team captain, and pointed out that my B-plus grades should have been A's. In many ways, my mother, Evelyn, was the complete antithesis of him. When he wasn't around, she was loving and caring. But when he was there, she changed and nearly retreated within herself. She never argued with him or defended us children when his criticism became too harsh. I didn't really comprehend this dynamic until I was much older. The way her eyes would flit to him before she responded to even basic inquiries about dinner arrangements or weekend activities was a bizarre power he possessed over her that plagued our day-to-day existence. I grew up in this complex household arrangement with my siblings. Unquestionably the golden child, my older brother Andrew was 3 years older than me. After graduating from Dad's Alma institution, he played football, made the honor roll, dated the right girls from the right households, and finally followed his father into the real estate industry. Andrew seemed to have an easy time of it, or at least I thought so. I kept guessing wrong, but he seemed to know instinctively what would delight our father. Despite being 2 years older than I was, my younger sister Lena somehow managed to get through our father's hazy approval system more adeptly than I ever could. She had an innate charm and an almost mystical ability to read the room, to know when to speak and when to sink into the background, but she wasn't the overachiever that Andrew was. She took on the role of family mediator, the one who, when father's mood soured, could sometimes make him chuckle. After really harsh criticizing sessions, the person would sneak into my room to reassure me that things weren't as bad as they seemed. However, nothing was ever enough for me. Father, who saw my decision as a betrayal of his heritage, campaigned for me to attend his alma mater instead. But I graduated first in my high school class and was awarded a full academic scholarship to Cornell. I managed to maintain my GPA while working 2 part-time jobs during my time in college. He would, however, ask me why I wasn't interning at more prominent firms during breaks. Knowing that I would always be viewed as a pity hire, I turned down his hesitant offer to work for his company after graduation. Rather, with just 2 suitcases and a strong will to succeed, I relocated to New York City and slept on a friend's couch while applying to every financial institution I could locate. His answer when I eventually got an entry-level job at Goldman Sachs was, "Let's see if you last a month." I did, working my way up without nepotism or family ties, and I did so for 8 years. In addition to my enthusiasm, I was driven by a frantic need to disprove him. I was just promoted to senior investment strategist last month, making me the youngest individual to hold the role in the company's history. I was able to purchase my ideal apartment in Manhattan, and still had money left over thanks to the significant pay increase. I used those resources to buy my father a brand new Mercedes S-Class for Father's Day, which I felt would be a big gesture. In my ideal world, He would finally view me as successful and deserving of his praise after receiving this gift. I told myself it would be worth it to finally hear him say he was proud of me, even though the automobile cost over a year's income. Now that I think about it, I realize how pitiful that need for approval was. How it had influenced all of my life's significant choices. My accomplishments weren't really for me. Rather, they were tools in an unwinnable battle for his love. I wasn't merely purchasing a fancy car when I made that purchase. I was also attempting to purchase the unrestricted love of a parent, which every child is entitled to. Charles Whitmore Sr.'s patriarchal status was celebrated at the annual Matthews family reunion, which traditionally took place on the final weekend of June, just in time for Father's Day. It would be the same this year, except that I had decided to finally stand out by buying that incredibly costly luxury vehicle, a sleek black Mercedes S-Class with all the high-end amenities Father had once remarked appreciating at the house of a country club acquaintance. My worry reached new heights as the date drew near. I went shopping for the ideal ensemble for 3 weekends. It had to be feminine without being frivolous, and it had to shout successful without trying too hard. My father always appeared to expect women in business to have that conflicting combination. In the end, I decided on a navy blue fitted dress from a designer my mother once said he liked, accessorized with delicate gold jewelry and pricey but understated shoes. Even while I took part in the same old pattern of preparation, it felt pitiful, the frantic ritual of a 32-year-old child still looking for approval. As I packed, memories of previous reunions that were all tinged with some kind of paternal disappointment came flooding back. He asked why I wasn't concentrating more on debate after I won the state math competition at the age of 16, saying that numbers people are easy to find. His only remark when I graduated from college with a summa cum laude was that my chosen area was unstable compared to real estate. He questioned out loud whether finance was simply glorified gambling when I received my first bonus at Goldman, and he inquired as to whether I had been chosen to meet a gender quota when I received my first promotion. Nothing was ever a success in and of itself, always tarnished by his doubt. However, there was another issue this year, one that had subtly shaken the roots of who I was only 3 months prior. I had utilized a well-known genetic testing business out of pure curiosity about my heritage, and the results had surprised me. I wasn't Charles Whitmore Sr.'s biological daughter based on my genetic markers. I discreetly sought a more conclusive test after the initial shock and incredulity. I secretly collected DNA samples from my father's hairbrush on a quick trip home. The findings were definitive, and were currently in my handbag in a sealed envelope. I wasn't sure if I should use the nuclear option. So much was explained by the discovery. Feeling alienated from my own family for the rest of my life. The minor physical distinctions that were never recognized. The unexplained coldness from a dad who at least showed his other children some basic affection. It seemed to me that he was aware, had always been aware, and that awareness had influenced all of our interactions. I made arrangements for delivery of the new Mercedes to a neighboring dealership, and drove it to my parents' suburban Boston house the day before the reunion. In order to ensure a private moment for my peace offering, I meticulously scheduled the presentation and arrived in the middle of the day, when Mother would be attending her garden club meeting. Despite the fact that it was a Saturday, my father answered the door in his typical sharp business casual outfit and appeared somewhat irritated by the interruption. "You're early, Clara." He checked his watch as though I had missed an appointment and remarked, "The reunion isn't until tomorrow." "I understand, Dad." With my heart racing, I handed him a tiny box with the car key and the Mercedes insignia prominently displayed. "I actually brought your Father's Day gift early and wanted to give it to you privately," I explained. His face changed to astonishment when he saw the logo, and he opened it with the courteous, cold demeanor he saved for required presents. "Is this a joke of some sort?" he inquired. The new automobile was shining in the driveway, and I led him to the front window. His look briefly changed to his typical analytical one after registering genuine shock and then something that seemed almost like pleasure. "Clara, this is going too far. What do you want to demonstrate?" Even though he was already heading for the front door with his key in hand, he questioned. I lied and said nothing. "I wanted to do something special for you because I got a big promotion." He went around the car twice, looking at it as if it were a real estate investment, noting characteristics and making incisive inquiries about insurance and financing that sounded more like an interrogation than an expression of appreciation. He put it in the garage instead of leaving it in the driveway where guests may see it after a quick test drive, during which he noted that the steering was a little loose despite the car's legendary handling. His expression of gratitude was brief, and he swiftly cut the legs out from under my impressive gesture by remarking that I must be doing well to waste money like this. I called my best friend Taylor from my hotel room that night, stifling tears as I described the unwelcoming reaction. "You know what?" With the righteous rage of a buddy who has heard too many tales like his, Taylor exclaimed, "Forget him. Return the vehicle. He is not deserving." I brushed the idea aside, still holding out hope that tomorrow might be different, that he may express gratitude in public. I might be seen at last. Before hanging up, Taylor admonished, "Just promise me you won't show him that test. Not unless nuclear fallout is something you're ready for." I said I would. However, the envelope was still in my handbag, a covert weapon that I was afraid of but also unable to completely give up. As if the surroundings were working together to give the appearance of the ideal family get-together, Sunday afternoon arrived with the ideal June weather, sunny and breezy. In order to prepare for the expected questions regarding my personal life, job path, and the fact that, at the ripe age of 32, I had neither a partner nor children, I took the long way to my parents' estate. As I proceeded onto the well-known driveway lined with maple trees, which was already partially occupied by opulent vehicles owned by my father's business friends and extended family, people who somehow always got the invite list for these ostensibly private family get-togethers, my knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Instead of hiding in the garage like it had been yesterday, I saw the Mercedes I had given him on display close to the front entrance. It was placed such that guests could not miss it when they arrived. I inhaled deeply, straightened my outfit, did a last cosmetics check, and strolled toward the imposing front door with the practiced confidence I'd built up in boardrooms full of men who thought I was smaller than I actually was. "You look beautiful, darling," Mother said, her face beaming with genuine joy as she embraced me. Then, like a weather warning, she added her typical line, "Your father's in the back garden with the Peterson Group." A familiar mix of my father's carefully cultivated network of contacts and real family members, recognized as honorary members of the Matthews clan, already filled the large foyer. Mother's sister, Aunt Linda, came right over with air kisses and quick-fire queries about my romantic life, while Uncle George shook hands and said, "There's our Wall Street magician," a moniker I knew my father would find annoying if he heard. In predictable patterns, family friends, second cousins, and cousins whirled around. Every year, the same discussions took place with little variation. Everyone in the Matthews family theater is acting out their designated parts. My father's arrival was just as well planned as I had anticipated. He came in from the garden with 3 business partners, all of whom were laughing at something that was probably just somewhat funny but was deemed hilarious because of the speaker's wealth. He glanced around the room, nodding and saying hello to each of the visitors before focusing on me. The tiniest tightening of his lips followed the glimmer of recognition. He then nodded, just like he had done to distant relatives, and moved past me to speak into Mother's ear. "I don't have a special greeting. His middle child. The daughter who recently gave him a car that was worth more than the yearly wages of most individuals." The old sting of dismissal still ached, but I feigned not to notice, talking to my cousin Naomi about her medical residency. A few moments later, Mother appeared at my side and lightly touched my arm. "Your father said you brought him a new automobile, darling." "How wonderfully giving," she remarked, her eyes expressing both appreciation and disapproval at the excess. "Come greet the Stevensons, please. They would appreciate your thoughts after returning from a financial conference in Singapore." This was Mother's method, constantly interfering, establishing social barriers, and fabricating excuses for family relationships that ought to occur organically. As was his way, Andrew arrived fashionably late. He made his entry with his ideal wife, Rebecca, and their 2 ideal children, giving me the warm father embrace I had worked so hard to acquire for decades. "The new automobile is crazy, Dad. You choose to upgrade when?" he inquired. And I stared in shock as my dad gave him a shoulder pat and said, "Son, sometimes you have to treat yourself. Success has its privileges," she said, omitting to acknowledge the present or my role. Before I could comprehend this obvious erasure, Lena stepped in and pulled me into a sincere embrace that lasted long enough to express her comprehension. "I was informed of your promotion. Liz, that's incredible. Very revolutionary," she muttered, referring to my childhood moniker that was no longer in use. Her genuineness was a comfort. However, the contrast with our father's lack of interest simply served to emphasize the divide. While appetizers were being passed around by hired servants, I saw my father guiding a group of his business partners toward the front drive while making animated gestures. I could see him flaunting the Mercedes through the wide bay windows, opening doors and pointing out features, his face glowing with a pride I had never seen directed at me. Lena said he's been doing that all morning, and she appeared at my elbow with a glass of wine, which I received with gratitude. 3 distinct tours for various cohorts of his associates. You bought it for him, according to my mother. Liz, it was so kind of you. As I took a sip of my wine, I observed my father settling into the driver's seat and inviting one of his colleagues to enjoy the opulence of the passenger side. I wasn't motivated by generosity, I said in a low voice. I wanted him to see myself as successful just once. As deserving of attention. Horrible, huh? Lena gave my arm a squeeze. Not pitiful. Human. However, Liz, you must comprehend. She paused, picking her words carefully. You will never get what you want from Dad. It's because he is incapable of doing it, not because you don't deserve it. There's something wrong with him, especially with you. Her comments struck with unexpected impact. Hearing someone else recognize the dynamic I'd experienced my entire life made it suddenly, painfully true in a way my private thoughts never had. It wasn't because they were new facts. It seemed like the paternity test in my purse had doubled in weight. The sealed package was a ticking time bomb that I fervently hoped to contain and longed to explode. The hour before supper passed in the steady cadence of Matthew's family get-togethers. In the one area of the house where Father's judgment was paramount, everyone moved to the formal living room, with its aggressively tasteful decor and uncomfortable antique furniture, which was chosen by Mother. With a second glass of wine in hand, I took a seat by the window, a little out of the main talking circle, and watched the familiar family dynamics with fresh insight. An almost anthropological distance was created by the realization that I was genetically different. Naturally, Andrew was the focus of attention, telling the gathered family about his most recent real estate purchase, a failing shopping center that he intended to turn into opulent condominiums. He clarified, my partners thought the initial investment was risky, but I saw the potential everyone else missed, as our father nodded in agreement from his leather recliner throne. Father said proudly, that's the Matthews instinct. Spotting potential where others perceive failure. It runs in the family. I understood the irony of what he was saying. With every blood-related claim, the envelope's illusory weight increased in my purse. Eventually, predictably, as Andrew wrapped up his self-congratulatory diatribe, the conversation turned to me. Clara, began Uncle Robert with sincere curiosity, Charles tells me you've advanced in your company? You mean senior investment strategist? Very impressive for your age. Father cleared his throat before I could reply. It's a good position to start in. However, the finance industry is erratic. It has always been. Not like owning a physical possession such as real estate. He turned to Andrew. Real assets endure changes in the market. They endure over generations. I expected the customary dismissal, but it still hurt. The deliberate return to real estate and Andrew. The implication that my chosen job route is substandard. Using the business-like tone I employed in challenging customer meetings I started, my division actually produced 30.8% returns last quarter, outperforming the market by 22 points during periods of high volatility. I created a risk assessment model which is currently used by the entire organization. There was an impressed stillness for a moment. Then Father waved dismissively in response. On paper, numbers. We will observe how that holds up when the next recession occurs. He averted his gaze, immediately turning to his business partner. In relation to real estate values, Henry, how do you feel about the zoning modifications made to the Cambridge corridor? I excused myself to get a drink, and I ran into Lena in the hallway after she had come back from seeing how her husband was doing, who was keeping an eye on the kids in the backyard. She squeezed my arm and said, "Don't let him get to you. Michael's cousin, a finance professional, told me about your model. It seems to be revolutionary." Even though I understood how pitiful it was to still yearn for such recognition, her affirmation made me feel better. I heard Father's voice drifting from his adjacent study, the door partly open, as I made my way to the dining room's bar setup. The vehicle? Indeed. A significant improvement over the previous model. These luxuries are earned when you put in the effort and create something from nothing, like I have done. Walter Peterson, Father's longtime business opponent and sporadic ally, was the one who answered. You old dog, Charles. The modest one always. During our earlier conversation, your daughter Clara said that she purchased it for you. Made a comment regarding her promotion. She seems to be establishing herself fairly well in New York. There was a momentary silence. Then Father answered, carefully selecting each word. Yes, the girl has always had a strong need for attention. In actuality, the chances I gave her are what led to her success. I gave all of my kids a foundational grasp of business, private education, and college connections. She's only using the car to demonstrate that she's finally putting what I taught her into practice. My achievements were casually erased, and my hard-won independence was rewritten as somehow resulting from his influence, even though he had offered only criticism, gave me a jolt of rage so strong I almost knocked over my drink. The discussion went on, with father portraying himself as the creator of accomplishments he had deliberately disregarded and explaining how he had always pushed Clara harder than the others because she needed that extra discipline. My rage hardened into a cold, clear fury, and I backed up before anyone found me. Andrew, with an unusually solemn expression, stopped me in the main corridor. "Clara, a word?" He led me to a peaceful nook next to Mother's cherished orchid exhibit. "Dad said you've been inquiring oddly about Mother's time at college. For what precisely are you digging?" I was surprised at how direct he was. Actually, following the DNA test, I had jokingly asked about Mother's premarital life in an attempt to find out about potential relationships, but I had felt that my inquiries were sufficiently nuanced. With caution, I answered, just getting to know her better. Before marriage and having children, women in her generation had limited opportunities to develop their own identities. Andrew used our father's critical eye to examine me. Once a source of pride, the family resemblance now seemed to me to be more proof of my isolation. "Look," he continued, "just stop doing whatever you're doing, whatever point you're trying to make with ostentatious presence and pointed inquiries. There's a set order in the family. A melody. Don't let whatever problem you're creating interfere with that." I nearly burst out laughing at how well his condescension mirrored father's. "Harmony?" I inquired. "Is this toxic hierarchy what you call it? This system in which the achievements of one individual are praised while those of another are disparaged?" "Andrew, I'm not making anything. I am finally able to see clearly." His voice down to avoid drawing notice, he took a step closer. "All of our possessions were built by Dad. Because of him, the Matthews name has significance. He laid the groundwork for your stylish apartment and your fancy job in New York. For once, be grateful and respectful." Apparently sensing the tension, our cousin Naomi came over before I could reply. "Is everything well here? Aunt Evelyn is trying to find you too. Dinner is about to be revealed, I believe." Andrew instantly put on his public smile, his image of the ideal son returning with ease. "Getting caught up with my younger sister. Talk about business. Nothing significant." Naomi lightly patted my arm as he left. "Your father plays favorites like it's an Olympic sport, and he's determined to medal in it," my mother says. "I think what you have done on your own is fairly amazing for what it is worth." My carefully cultivated serenity was almost shattered by her gentle encouragement. It seemed simultaneously both gratifying and terrible to have someone else recognize the relationship, having spent so many years persuading myself that it was my vision, not reality, that was the issue. Mother gave the indication for everyone to start heading toward the formal dining room when the dinner bell rung. I stayed behind, my fingers grazing the envelope shape in my bag while I considered my alternatives, potential outcomes, and various situations. There was a part of me that wanted to go right away. Should distance oneself from this pretense of family harmony, to shield myself from the injuries that the night will inevitably cause. However, a more powerful, possibly masochistic, aspect resisted retreating. This was something I was going to do. To at last face the tangible proof of the underlying reason of a lifetime of rejection. I made one more check of the envelope to be sure the test results were still securely sealed inside. Then, bracing myself for the performance, I erected my shoulders and headed for the dining room. I had always thought that the formal dining room of the Matthews was the ideal representation of our family. Even though there were 20 seats at the massive mahogany table, it felt icy and impersonal. The walls were decorated with portraits of ancestors who watched with disapproving eyes. Like everything else in my father's meticulously created world, the ornate place settings put look before comfort. With the table settings, Mother had gone above and beyond. The chandelier's light fell on crystal cups. The centerpieces were carefully positioned with fresh flowers. Perfectly calligraphed name cards were used to designate each guest a specific position within the family structure. As expected, I located my card well down the table, situated between one of Father's younger business acquaintances and cousin Naomi's husband, whom I had maybe met twice. Kept a safe distance from any important discussions. Lena and her husband acted as a barrier between the inner circle and the lower-ranking relatives, while Andrew and his family claimed the prominent seats next to father at the head of the table. Mother was seated at the other end, which perfectly reflected her position within the family, nominally equal but separated by the table's length. Close but far away. Waitstaff arranged the first meal with military precision, presenting each person with an exquisite appetizer of grilled scallops with microgreens at the same time. Father got up and demanded instant stillness without uttering a word while holding a wine glass. He greeted everyone with practiced charm, his public presence polished to a glossy sheen, and said, "Welcome, family and friends, to our annual reunion. Every year, I am reminded of how fortunate I am to have created a legacy that is embodied by my family in addition to a successful business." He looked triumphantly at Andrew, who nodded gratefully, and then at Lena, who gave me a charming grin before letting her glance fly straight past me, as though I were on the same visual plane as the wallpaper. He went on, gesturing to his business colleagues, "A special welcome to the Peterson Group joining us this year. One naturally attracts more success when they are around it. Family success comes from embracing proven pathways, rather than unnecessarily challenging tradition," Father said as the toast continued, emphasizing Lena's nomination to a community board and Andrew's recent company expansion. When his eyes finally fell on me, they were piercing and clearly meant something. Father used surgical precision and subtle clues to guide the discourse as the lunch progressed over 5 intricate dishes. The subjects stayed firmly within his favorite spheres: local politics, real estate markets, and the occasional sports conversation, which opportunistically emphasized Andrew's prior sporting success. During a pause in conversation, Mother tried to convey my recent elevation in a gentle way, but Father easily cut her off. "In relation to financial markets, Henry, how do you interpret the Fed's most recent signals?" he inquired, essentially undoing her work without ever recognizing it had taken place. The pattern was fully formed by the time the fish entered the course. Father would occasionally ask me incisive questions, each one intended to denigrate rather than to provoke conversation. "Clara, I take it that your company mostly deals with domestic investments? Given the prospects for worldwide expansion, isn't it restricting? Or, I am aware that the Davidson account came after your promotion. It was fortunate that Andrew could introduce you to William Davidson at the charity event the previous year." Every statement was thoughtfully crafted to reinterpret any accomplishment I might have had as either limited in scope or wholly derived from family ties I had purposefully, and frequently painfully, avoid. I refused to display the emotional response he seemed anxious to elicit, instead maintaining the cordial, businesslike manner I had mastered in contentious boardrooms. "In fact, Father," I remarked jokingly, "my risk assessment model was integrated by our international division last quarter. Additionally, there were no introductions required for the Davidson account, which was obtained in a blind pitch competition." I made my changes with a smooth, almost joyful delivery, but I could see Lena wince sympathetically with every exchange. It was the same old family dance, painfully predictable. A little respite from the conversational minefield was offered when the main course, an overly complex beef Wellington, arrived. It demanded everyone's attention for several minutes. Father took advantage of the occasion to open another bottle of wine that was too costly to drink. Throughout the dinner, his intake had been gradually rising, a worrying trend Mother monitored with small, anxious looks. Father waved dismissively at Andrew as he bent over to whisper something in his ear. Father's focus returned to me as coffee and dessert were delivered. Alcohol had worn down the few filters he typically kept. "With kind intentions," Mrs. Peterson said, "Clara, Charles tells me you're still single. What a stunning, successful young lady. They must terrify the men in New York." Father interrupted before I could come up with a courteous reply about putting job growth first. He swirled his bourbon thoughtfully and remarked, "Clara has always been focused on proving something, rather than building something. Some people want success in order to satisfy other needs. Compromise is necessary for family, and the Matthews women have historically understood this better than she has." The casual harshness was delivered with practiced accuracy, suggesting that my career success was not an accomplishment in and of itself, but rather restitution for personal failure. Even from the far side of the table I could hear Mother's sudden intake of breath. "Charles," she started, uncharacteristically firmly. However, he went on as though she hadn't said anything. "Perhaps Clara wouldn't be in her 30s alone if she had expressed more interest in the appropriate matches I introduced over the years instead of brushing them off as uninteresting or traditional." Every word was chosen with care to have the greatest possible impact. A public judgment of my personal decisions disguised as a parental concern instead of the scathing criticism it was. Behind my eyes, the familiar pressure grew, the need to run from the table like a child rising like a tide, against the grown-up will to save my dignity. Despite the mental turmoil beneath, I took a measured drink of water and noted with disinterest that my hand stayed steady. Using every negotiating tactic I had ever mastered, I replied calmly, "I appreciate your concern for my personal fulfillment, Father. However, as you frequently highlighted, Matthews prioritizes outcomes. And my findings are self-evident." There was a tight stillness across the table. Family members who had observed such interactions over the years studied their dessert plates intently. Father's business partners shifted uneasily as they were enthralled with the ceiling's architectural intricacies. With every heartbeat, the pressure in my chest increased, the result of a lifetime of similar experiences. These public humiliations are flimsily represented as family issues. These meticulous erasers of my identity and accomplishments. Potential energy appeared to pulse through the envelope in my purse. I had vowed to myself in Taylor that I would not use a nuclear option. I became acutely aware that the present course was unsustainable when waitstaff cleaned dessert platters. That I could no longer afford to continue to seek acceptance from a man who was genetically designed to deny it. As the sumptuous lunch came to an end with brandy being offered and coffee cups being replenished, Father moved his chair back a little, a gesture that everyone in the family understood to be a prelude to one of his spontaneous statements. After years of Matthews get-togethers, the custom had developed. There was an instantaneous stillness of anticipation. Conversations stopped in the middle of sentences. The silverware was carefully set down. The patriarch was instinctively the center of attention. With his brandy snifter in hand, Father stood with the kind of benign authority he saved for these public appearances. With a voice that had the tone of someone who has been in charge of rooms for a long time, he said, "I'd like to take a moment to express my pride in what the Matthews family continues to build together before we disperse to the garden for our annual family photograph." He made a broad motion, kindly referring to the business associates as honorary members of this fictitious dynasty. Father said, "A family is much like a business. A business that needs leadership, vision, and people who know their roles in achieving success as a group." His eyes moved over the table in that well-honed manner that gives the impression that he is looking at everyone, but in reality he is not looking at anyone. I am reminded of how fortunate I am to have children who make significant contributions to the family legacy as I look around this table. He lifted his drink a little and turned to face Andrew. "Andrew, you continue to amaze me and the Boston development community at large with your commercial acumen. The Riverside Project exemplifies the kind of audacious, progressive methodology that sets Matthews Enterprises apart from smaller endeavors. You've upgraded the teachings I've taught you in addition to accepting them." Andrew, his joy scarcely disguised, nodded with studied humility. The golden child gets what he deserves. Then Father turned to Lena, his face becoming even more gentle. "And Lena, you exhibit incredible maturity in your ability to strike a balance between your leadership in the community and your family obligations. Your collaboration with the Children's Hospital Board has elevated the Matthews name to a truly prestigious level and served as a reminder to all of us that real success involves giving back. Your mother and I are incredibly pleased of the ideals you uphold and the family you are raising." Lena's smile was sincere, but a little awkward. Always more comfortable giving praise than getting it herself. I prepared myself for the inevitable next step, the deliberate omission. Where my name should be, there was a sharp stillness. Praise by exclusion is a widely used strategy that conveys a stronger message than direct criticism. It was such a familiar gesture that I could practically time my breathing. However, what transpired in its place was in some ways worse. At last, Father's eyes found me. His eyes narrowed slightly, indicating that what was about to happen was planned. "I'm struck by how differently success can be defined as I reflect on my children's accomplishments," he added, his voice shifting into a tone that others could mistake for deep reflection, but I recognized as the prelude to assault, wrapped in silk. Tension was allowed to develop during the dramatic pause as he took a purposeful sip of brandy. With his glass raised higher, he declared, "I'm proud of all my children." And aside from the loser seated at the table, I briefly experienced a ludicrous burst of hope that was swiftly dashed by his persistence. The words came out cruelly and precisely. Then there was a beat of stunned stillness. The visitors then began to chuckle apprehensively, with most thinking this was an internal joke rather than the public evisceration it truly was. Every eye at the table turned to me, and I felt the blood rush to my face before it drained away entirely, leaving behind a chilly numbness. Expressions included morbid curiosity, sympathy, and shame. Father went on as though he had joked lightly about the weather. Some people use titles and pay, as well as flimsy accomplishments that appear remarkable on paper but lack substance and longevity, to gauge success. Continuing family customs and expanding upon them, as opposed to continuously attempting to establish one's own value at the expense of group power, are the keys to true success. Nobody was duped by some people's purposeful ambiguity. His words were absolutely clear in their target. Mother's knuckles were bloodless around her napkin, and her face had turned absolutely white. Andrew appeared smugly content. Lena sat in public embarrassment. In quiet encouragement, Cousin Naomi stretched over her husband to touch my arm, but I hardly noticed. The man at the head of the table, who had just verified what the DNA test had previously revealed to me, that I was essentially different, grabbed my whole attention. Something else. He does not consider himself a true member of this family. I lay motionless for 20 seconds that seemed like hours, feeling the physical pain of embarrassment with clinical coldness, the cheeks that were on fire, the tightness in the throat, the heartbeat quickened. My body was flooded with adrenaline from the fight-or-flight reaction. Like a painful slideshow, a lifetime of similar incidents played back to me. Accomplishments reframed as failures, subtly undermined, and public corrections. Every memory built on the one before it, creating the cumulative message that I was essentially inadequate, unworthy of the name I carried, a name that couldn't even be mine, as genetic science recently verified. Something in me changed profoundly when Father wrapped up his remarks with some platitude about family unity, words that seemed hollow after his blatant rejection. Between the frantic youngster looking for approval and the adult lady who, at that precise moment, realized clearly the pointlessness of that lifelong quest, a final thread broke. The envelope in my purse changed its weight from one of burden to one of freedom. Its contents were no longer a humiliating secret. Rather, they were a key that would open the cage of unrealistic expectations I had spent my whole life in. Uncomfortably, the room hung in suspense, awaiting my response. Maybe anticipating tears. Or a hurried departure. The traditional Matthews family drama came to a predictable end, just as it had in years past. Rather, I experienced an odd sense of tranquility. The choice, which may have been inevitable from the time the test results were received, gained clarity of purpose. I found myself standing without having completely planned the deed. The action demanded attention right away since it was so intentional and fluid. Conversations stopped in the middle of sentences. Everybody's gaze shifted to me, with looks ranging from interest to fear. The latter, mostly from people who had seen earlier conflicts in the Matthews family. I kept my glass of champagne on the table, purposefully left it down. My unwillingness to toast had a clear symbolic meaning. I used steady hands to smooth my dress, astonished by the complete silence that had replaced the previous chaos. As if I had entered a storm's eye and entered a state of quiet. I started by saying, "Thank you, Father, for that insightful speech." My voice came through easily and clearly. In this unexpected venue, I was able to use the polished tone I had mastered in boardrooms. I've spent 32 years measuring myself against standards that inexplicably changed whenever I was on the verge of meeting them, trying to gain approval that was never going to be given. The silence had fallen on the room. The weighted quiet that comes before important things. Mother's expression was one of dread. When Father saw that this script wasn't going as he had anticipated, his expression clouded. In a purposeful tone that belied the seriousness of what was about to happen, I went on. For those who are keeping score, I graduated first in my class at Cornell, built a career without family ties, and recently became the youngest senior investment strategist in my firm's history. Far from being a loser by most objective standards, I let my eyes wander around the table, making fleeting eye contact with a few family members. Some gave a small acknowledgement nod before averting their eyes. I then returned my focus to Father. However, objective achievement has never been the definition of success in Charles Whitmore Sr. world, has it? It has to do with fitting in with his particular perspective. Rather than producing one's own light, it is about reflecting glory back upon him. With purposeful composure, I reached for my handbag, knowing that every motion was now being scrutinized intently. It was impossible to overlook the unexpected sight of the obedient middle child finally stepping forward. I remarked directly to Father, whose face had retreated behind the icy mask he wore when business conversations weren't going his way. I bought you a car worth more than most people make in a year. I still had the innocent hope that a large enough gesture might finally close whatever enigmatic gap has existed between us my entire life. Not because you needed it or even particularly deserved it. I took the envelope with the paternity test results out of my purse. Given the gravity of the reality it contained, the paper now appeared fairly ordinary. For 30 years, I held myself responsible for your failure to treat me with the same level of love that you give to Andrew and Lena. Never realizing that my actions weren't the issue, I twisted myself into a million different forms in an attempt to become whatever would ultimately win your favor. My DNA contained it. As the implication of what I had said hit, a collective gasp of breath went around the table. The last of the color left Mother's face. Andrew stood up abruptly, his gaze fixed on the envelope that now lay between us like a lit fuse. I positioned it exactly in the middle of the table. I made cautious, measured motions. Managed. For you, Dad. Happy Father's Day, I replied, quietly conclusively, adding all the irony the occasion called for to the paternal moniker. I turned and left the dining room without waiting for a reply. I have a straight back. I take my time, maintaining the honor that had been methodically taken away from me all night. The stunned quiet persisted until I arrived in the spacious foyer, and then the unavoidable explosion. Confusion, protest, demands, and denial were among the overlapping waves of conflicting voices. A choir of order falling apart. Without hesitation, I went outside again. The cool evening air felt good against my red face. The driveway's path was illuminated by ornamental lanterns, which produced soft pools of light as the evening grew darker. Father had parked the Mercedes in the exact spot he had chosen for visibility, its shiny black paintwork reflecting the lights in the home. A representation of all that I had been attempting to buy with affection, and funds that ought to have gone toward my personal tranquility. The choice was more inevitable than deliberate. I reached into my purse and found the extra key fob. The remote unlock gave a soft chirp in response, a sound that was too happy for the occasion. Taking the wheel, I slid in. Father's fragrance was still somewhat mingled with the distinctive new car smell in the leather upholstery, serving as a fleeting olfactory recall of his brief ownership. I could see people congregating around the dining room windows through the windshield, silhouettes making lively gestures. My confession and my departure have now completely unleashed the family drama. With costly precision, the engine hummed to life. Silently, as though nothing significant had happened, the dashboard glowed with welcome. As if, instead of being a last release from 32 years of emotional captivity, this were just another drive. The front door swung open as I backed down the driveway. The golden light framed the figure of Father. One hand held what looked like the envelope that had been opened, perhaps forming my name. His mouth moved, but the sound was drowned out by the soft rumbling of German engineering. As I turned into the street, I saw the symmetry. He was now physically removing the fancy car he had proudly displayed to his colleagues, while downplaying my role. The same way he'd tried to belittle me for 30 years. Two acts of deletion that now perfectly balanced the story. The instinctive behavior suddenly turned into a deliberate choice. Reclaiming the gift turned into a metaphor for reclaiming my value as a person. They were both freed from the hold of someone who had never shown them the respect that comes with appreciation. The Matthews estate dwindled in the rearview mirror, getting smaller by the second. Distance eroded its grandeur. Every time the wheels turned, its emotional grip loosened and it carried me away. Happiness wasn't exactly the lightness that was coursing through my chest. It was too complicated and bittersweet for such a crude term. Something else was involved. The feeling of freedom that is new. Of decisions that are no longer skewed by the pressure of parental acceptance. In my life, for the first time, I was out of orbit now. I was on my way. The Mercedes reacted with silent accuracy as I steered clear of my home neighborhood. Every turn increased the gap between who I was 30 minutes earlier and who I was becoming now, not just in kilometers but also in identity. When the first call came through, I was almost to the highway entrance. Andrew, Mother, and a number of cousins appeared on the dashboard screen in quick succession after Lena's name. The digital proof of the mayhem I left behind. I didn't fully shut down the phone, but I did turn off the ringer. Even if I wasn't prepared to deal with the aftermath head-on, there was still a part of me that needed to see it. I gave myself one look in the rearview mirror as I turned onto the highway, moving toward Boston proper instead of back to New York, and that was right before a man jumped into the street behind me. Father was there. His normally calm demeanor was twisted into something I had never seen him do before, something other than rage, something unprocessed, nearly unidentifiable. The controlled patriarch I had known was peeled away by a gesture of arms raised high, revealing something hollowed down underneath. His voice was too far away for me to hear, but I could hear the scream without audio. Like a rupture, it rushed out of his body, silent yet indelible. As I sped off, the picture smashed into my mind. The seismic shift that had just taken place had a visual coda. 3 pages of scientific data and one flash of crystal-clear insight shattered the meticulously crafted family story beyond redemption. 30 minutes later, my phone showed 29 text messages and 17 missed calls when I checked into a hotel in downtown Boston. The digital counterpart of the explosion I'd set off before turning to leave. After setting the room key on the desk and removing my heels, I at last gave myself permission to go over the messages, starting with Lena's. They started off perplexed. What had just transpired? What did that envelope contain? Liz, I'm worried. Give me a call, please. Everyone is in a panic. Then things started to fall apart. Dad is saying crazy things. Mom shut herself in her chamber. Andrew is threatening to take the car to court. Mother's voicemail started out okay but then went worse. Clara, please call home when you get a chance, was the first kind remark. Her voice broke with emotion by the 5th message. The test? The test can't be right. Some mistake must exist. Please return so that our family may talk about this. Mother's last message was that. Andrew, however, had confined himself to just 2 texts, each of which was more icy than the one before it. Return Dad's belongings right away. Retract your vile charges or risk legal repercussions. They gave predictable answers. Lena is looking for a relationship. Andrew is giving orders. They performed their designated responsibilities flawlessly, even at times of stress. With my phone in hand, I sat on the edge of the motel bed. I was able to analyze the events of the evening with unexpected clarity, because of the emotional and physical separation from the reunion. My deep-seated intuition had always known that Charles Whitmore Sr. was not my biological father, and the paternity test had just proved that his lifelong emotional distance from me wasn't a result of temperament, but rather the conscious retreat of a guy who understood, and refused to admit, a basic reality. I had impulsively purchased the test after using a recreational genetic testing service to idly research my ancestry. A weird, almost comforting sense of understanding replaced the initial shock of misplaced paternal markers. It explained an intangible thread that had kept me just outside the frame of my own family photo for my whole life. A sense of feeling otherness. The meticulously preserved Matthew's image was crumbling in real time now that the information was out there. 3 pages of scientific fact bring decades of pretense to a head. The most illuminating answer was not written down. After taking a shower and changing into clothing from the overnight bag I had packed in case the reunion got too much, it happened almost 2 hours later. It felt like a preemptive precaution now. My phone rang. Lena. I needed to hear one voice for some reason. Only one. To verify that the earthquake I had caused had not only exploded inside my head, but had also reverberated across the outside world. Liz. Lena spoke quietly. She sounded as though she was calling from a discreet location, still hidden among the shocked people in the house. Are you all right? Where are you? Her tone of real concern almost broke the hard-won calm I had been trying to maintain. I gave a vague response. I'm safe. What's going on over there? She let out a breath. Long, heavy. Chaos. Total collapse. I shut my eyes while she went on. Dad opened the envelope in front of everyone at the table after you departed. After reading it for about 30 seconds, he began yelling for Mom. She got absolutely white with just one glance at the page. From a distance, Mother had kept tabs on his life via alumni newsletters and more recently discreetly social media. However, she had never spoken to him. She had kept her word to Charles that the past would be forgotten. That, if not by blood, I would be a Matthews. It was time for the most difficult question by the time we got to our 3rd coffee. For as long as I could remember, it had resided just beneath my skin. Why did you never defend me? Silently, the words were spoken, managed, but they were burdened with decades' worth of debt. You witnessed his treatment of me in contrast to Andrew and Lena. You saw him methodically discredit me for every accomplishment and effort to win his favor. She blinked quickly, but kept looking. What allowed that to go on for 30 years? My rage was suddenly overshadowed by the deep anguish that crumpled her cheeks. I failed you, she replied quietly, without any justifications or sidesteps. Every time I thought about telling you the truth, explaining why he was unable to pay you what you were due, the time seemed off. The possible harm is too severe. She glanced at her unopened cup. Then the falsehood got bigger as time went on, more difficult to fix. I reassured myself that you were resilient, that you were creating a life without his consent. A pause. Until yesterday, I had no idea how much that pursuit still motivated you. There was no resolution to the discussion. No clear conclusions could be drawn. It would take time, discomfort, and a shared willingness to rebuild on the basis of truth. But it would be the start of something more honest. Another seismic shift occurred the next day. There was an email from Daniel Mercer, my father by birth. After verifying his identity through public databases, he was responding to the message I had sent. He was cautious but kind in his response, startled but receptive. He requested some time to come to terms with the fact that he had a daughter he had never known existed. However, he showed sincere desire to establish a connection. Your email signature indicates that you are employed in the finance industry in New York, he said. Ironically, I have a conference in Manhattan next month. If you don't mind, maybe we could get together for coffee. It was easy, courteous, measured. No presumptions or accusations were made. No coercion. Just a man recognizing my professional identity without comparison or qualification. His tone of neutral respect was soothing to raw wounds. It hinted at potential connections, untarnished by the complex history of the Matthews name. The professional world continued to churn, oblivious to my identity issue, while these inner earthquakes changed the way I thought about family. My manager called me in the middle of the week with inquiries regarding a customer presentation that was coming up. I had to personally explain my risk assessment model for the Charleston account. She said, "They're specifically asking for you by name. Clara, you're becoming more well known." What should have been clear all along, that my achievement and value were entirely apart from my family, was reaffirmed in just one remark. About the name I once tried so hard to make legitimate. My character, my strengths, and my clarity were all mine. 6 days following the reunion, Charles made his first direct contact. Not over the phone. Not with apologies, but via his lawyer. A chilly, official letter demanding the Mercedes return and threatening legal action for defamatory statements made in public regarding paternity arrived via certified mail. Everything I needed to know about both men was crystallized by the contrast between that cold, defensive gesture and Daniel Mercer's careful, compassionate response. One ready to get to know me despite not sharing my genetic makeup. The other unable to look past blood but connected by decades of common history. I had abruptly come to the conclusion that character was considerably more important in determining authentic ancestry than genetics. I made it clear that DNA evidence could not be defamatory by definition and gave my lawyer instructions to arrange for the Mercedes to be returned. Andrew remained silent on the radio. His devotion to father was not surprising, considering their shared worldview and true biological kinship. But Lena called every day. Sincere discussions on familial issues that we had both seen but had never dared to discuss out loud helped to strengthen our bond. She said on one late-night call that he's been controlling the narrative our entire lives, forcing us to vie for approval that was never provided equitably. That system helped me, but I could constantly see how it damaged other people. I apologize for not defending you more. I didn't realize the scars were still festering until her acknowledgement helped them heal. Strangely, the confirmation of my experience, from someone who had actually seen it, was far more potent than any test result could possibly be. My life had changed in both little and significant ways 6 months following the disclosure. I was able to unravel the web of performance anxiety and conditional love that had long motivated my accomplishments through weekly therapy sessions. I started to see true success as distinct from the draining need for acceptance. Mother and I developed a closer, more genuine bond. Raw, occasionally painful discussions about decision-making, consequences, and the nuanced love that had always existed beneath the Matthews family theater took the place of her meticulous display of perfection. And suddenly Daniel Mercer was there. It was at a quiet cafe close to Central Park that I first met him. It was both unnerving and incredibly reassuring to have my own facial expressions and body language mirrored in a stranger. Hours into a talk that proceeded with unexpected ease, he remarked over dessert, "You have my mother's analytical mind. That spark, though, when you discuss market trends. That is undoubtedly my fault." We cultivated our friendship carefully. We didn't try to impose a father-daughter relationship right away. Instead, we established a solid foundation based on our same intellectual interests and the silent awe of learning how genetics explained characteristics I had never observed in the Matthews family. At Thanksgiving, the last component of my new mosaic came together. Instead of going to the customary get-together at our parents' estate, I accepted Lena's offer to supper at her house. When Charles found out I would be there, he refused to come. His persistent rejection only reaffirmed what I already knew. It no longer pierced. My boundaries were no longer dictated by his constraints. As we made dessert together, Lena softly remarked, "He can't change." The giggling of her kids reverberated from the adjacent room. "I won't. Not possible. Your existence threatens the certainties upon which his entire identity is based." There was no judgment in her comments. Only acknowledgement. Mother called after supper. Her voice was more powerful than I remembered from my early years. It was present rather than performative. She said plainly, "Clara, I'm proud of you. Not for your work, your residence, or anything you've accomplished, even though those are impressive. I'm proud of your identity, your fortitude, your ability to construct truth from lies." She paused. "I ought to have told you that every single day of your life." With healing force, the words that I had yearned to hear from Charles for 30 years, spoken freely now by the parent who had always loved me despite her imperfections, landed. Not because they were flawless. However, they arrived condition-free. As I hung up, I became aware of the journey's most deep truth. That family is more than just genetics. It goes beyond names, court records, and hereditary traditions. Those who clearly see you and still love you are your family. People that respect your true personality instead of expecting you to play a part. I had once bought a fancy car as a last-ditch effort to please a father figure who would never accept me, but it had been reclaimed, sold, and forgotten. My decision to move away from him and the suffering that molded me was a turning point in my life. The best retaliation isn't always loud. There is silence. It's choosing calm over chaos, living well, and undergoing profound healing. Remember that your value is unquestionable if you have ever experienced betrayal or felt unnoticed in your own family. Establish limits. Get more powerful. Let depart with honor. You're not by yourself. Tell us in the comments how you were able to regain your authority. Because silence is not conducive to healing. It begins when we communicate and establish a connection. What would your recovery look like then?